Hi, my name is Lily and welcome back to my channel and welcome to my February wrap-up. So February was a bit of a slow reading month for me personally. I didn't read as much as I normally would, and the majority of my reading was probably by audiobook. I read 6 books in total, was expecting to read a lot more, but I just honestly wasn't in a headspace to read very much, especially sitting down and actually reading books like ebooks and paperbacks, hardbacks, which is why I have more audiobooks this month. So my first read in February was Writer's Reign by Lucy Lennox. This is a reread for me. Again, you'll notice there's more rereads this month. This is an adult romance from the Aster Valley series. It is the first book in the Aster Valley series by Lucy Lennox. So this one is a male-male romance and it follows Tiller and Mikey. Tiller is an NFL player who is like the first out gay NFL player in the game, and Mikey is the son of Tiller's coach who is also gay and has a bit of a history of dating his father's players and things going wrong, but he is also a private chef and wants to one day have a restaurant and a cookbook. And the story behind this is he ends up being Tiller's private chef, and he is warned by his father that he absolutely cannot mess around with Tiller because he is too valuable to the team, but they start to fall in love. So this is probably my favourite of Lucy Lennox's books. Now, most of her books are pretty trashy, but what I liked about this one is you think it's going to be enemies to lovers, because when they first meet they don't like each other and they're kind of being forced to work together because Tiller needs a nutritionist and Mikey can do that. But then as it progresses, you get this big time jump between when they first become like working together and Mikey moves in to be his private chef. You then get a big time jump to a few years later where they form this really close friendship and they're living together rather than Mikey being in the annex, and they're really close friends. And then Tiller gets an injury and they go to Aster Valley to recover from Tiller's injury. Mikey goes with him to continue being his chef, and you start to see this romance blossoming between them. And I love it. They're really sweet. They're a really, really sweet couple, and it's a really wholesome story. And I quite liked this one because it's quite low strife for a romance. So the third act breakup feels very kind of low-key to me, and you can really see the love for them. So this is why I reread it. This is why I love it. It is genuinely one of my favourite romances and one of my favourite Lucy Lennox's, because I find that Lucy Lennox is kind of it's either going to be complete trash or it's really, really heartwarming and sweet, and most of her books are kind of trashy and I love them for that, but this one I really adore because it was just so sweet. Then my next read was a physical read, and that is Final Offer by Lauren Asher. So this is the third and final book in the Dreamland Billionaires series. If you want to hear my more in-depth thoughts and spoilery thoughts, please head to my reading vlog for this book where I updated every 100 pages. I will say this is probably my least favourite of the Dreamland Billionaires trilogy, but it still is a 4-star read. So the Dreamland Billionaires series is about 3 brothers whose grandfather is the owner of this world's equivalent to Disneyland and Disney, and he has passed away, and in his will he has put out these conditions for his grandsons to complete in order to inherit their part of the shares and also to get their job in the company. So this one we have, I believe he's the middle brother, Cal. So the condition for him is that he has to go and spend the summer in his grandfather's lake house and sell it by the end of the summer. But what he doesn't know before he gets there is that there is also his ex-girlfriend who lives there, who is under the impression that she owns the house. And there's various stipulations, like he can't sell to her, he can't sell to one of his brothers can't set up a buyer, and essentially he has to sell both his and his ex-girlfriend's shares, but she hates him. And so it is a really heartwarming second chance romance, and I normally hate second chance romances, but I really love this one. So in this one we have Cal, who is an addict and an alcoholic. These days he seems to only be falling prey to alcohol. He doesn't seem to be using drugs anymore, but he does have a history of using drugs, and that is ultimately why he ended up breaking up with Alana, who is our female main character in this book. And we have Alana, who also has a history with family having alcohol and addiction issues, and she has adopted her sister's daughter and is now raising her in this lake house. So they are now working together to try and sell the lake house, and she's quite resistant to the whole idea because she always thought she would live there and that she'd be able to raise her daughter there and send her to a private school. This one will really really get you. It is really sad to read from Cal's perspective and see how dependent he is on the alcohol and how much he reaches for it. But I really loved his strength and seeing him try to battle it. What I didn't enjoy about this book was I felt that Alana didn't have her own story and didn't have her own agency, really, as much as she consistently pushes back on Cal and kind of puts her foot down and forces him to change and says that she will not sort of be with him if he is going to continue in his addiction. I feel like her own storyline is neglected in that she is this amazing baker who wants to open a bakery but doesn't have the means, and it feels like everything good that happens for her is more because of Cal, and she doesn't have much of her own storyline, which was a bit disappointing. So that's why I didn't give it 5 stars. Then we have Wonderland by Juno Dawson, which is one of the contenders for Best Book of the Year for me. So this one is a YA contemporary, and it is the final book in her London trilogy, which is a group of books all kind of around a similar vibe and have characters that make cameos in each other's books, but they are not strictly linked and you don't have to read them in order. I did because my brain likes to do that, but you don't have to. So this one follows Alice. She goes to this very elite, exclusive private school, which is also a boarding school, and she is essentially new money because her mother is this famous author who sort of pulled them out of poverty through her writing. I don't need purrs and kisses right now, Mikey, I'm sorry. And she has a connection to another girl in this school called Bunny, and it's quite unclear at first what the connection is, but Bunny has gone missing and she really wants to know where Bunny is, and a lot of the people are kind of dismissing it because Bunny often disappears, but this seems more unusual. And so she investigates and she finds an invitation for Bunny to something called Wonderland, and she decides to try and take Bunny's invitation to go to Wonderland, see what it is, and see if she can find Bunny. And Wonderland is this exclusive party weekend with the elite of this world, and it's kind of anything can happen, and rich people really do get away with anything sort of weekend. And while she's there, she is trying to find out what happened to Bunny. It's a weird, wild, wacky ride. It's really hard to explain it and to describe it without giving any spoilers, but I adored it. This was a really easy 5 stars for me, and I actually read this pretty much in one day. I read 30 pages in a night, and then the following day I was travelling into the office into London, and I read the entirety of this book on my train to and from London. It was that good. So it's amazing. I'd also recommend the audiobook. It's very twisty and turny, and none of the characters are particularly likeable, but in a good way. In that means you don't trust them, you're questioning them, you're wondering what's going to happen. And it has a very unsatisfying ending in a good way, if you understand what I mean, because it's one of those dealing with like rich people, and not everybody gets their comeuppance, but it's kind of good because it's not the ending you predict. So yeah, it was much more twisty and darker than I was expecting. Definitely check for trigger warnings for it, but I really liked it. Then I read another book from the Aster Valley series by Lucy Lennox. This is another reread for me, and that is Hot as Hella. This is, I believe, the 3rd book in the Aster Valley series, and it's another favourite for me, but this one is more of a favourite because it's kind of trashy. So in this one, we have Declan, who has just become the new sheriff of Aster Valley. I won't tell you why, because that'll be spoilers for book 2. But he has come from LA because there's been this massive corruption scandal, and he had to provide evidence against his own partner for what happened in LA. So he's come to Aster Valley looking for a quieter life with no drama. But unfortunately for him, a movie has just started to film in Aster Valley and its surrounding mountains, and one of the people involved in that movie is Finn Heller. Finn Heller is an ex-child star who's looking to redefine his image by being in this action movie, except he has a real passion for the classics and Shakespeare, and the reason that he is taking part in this movie is that he has been promised a role in a Shakespeare adaptation if this movie does well. And so the two of them consistently butt heads during Finn's time in Aster Valley, and they start to see other sides of each other. I love this one because it is kind of trashy and it is an age gap romance, so if that's something you don't like, I wouldn't recommend it. But it's really interesting about an old soul meeting someone older and it is sweet and it was funny, and I enjoy ones where initially they have very sort of different opinions of each other than what they end up with, and they have to get over their misconceptions. And I love a celebrity romance as well, they're always fun. So this one is a fun time, a bit sad at times, but it is a fun read, and it talks a lot about the role of police officers and also child stars, changing your image, but also the exploitation of actors and especially child actors in Hollywood. So it's a very interesting read, very fun, very trashy, and I will reread it many times. And finally, we have The Unlikely Escape of Uriah Heep by H.G. Parry. This is actually one of my 30 before 30 books, so I should be doing a review of this at some point, like a full review. But unfortunately, I have not done that yet. So this one was chosen for me by Beth from Books Nest. And I also buddy read this with Tilly from Valaris Book Club. I will link them both below. So this is a fantasy and kind of an urban fantasy, and I would say it leans more adult. So the idea behind this one is that there are some people in the world who are able to read book characters out of their books, but when they read them out, it is their interpretation of the character that comes out, not how the character is necessarily written. And Charles in this book, or Charlie, he has the ability to do this, and it is told from the perspective of his brother, who is kind of this long-suffering brother who is fed up of constantly having to go and rescue Charlie when he has accidentally read someone out of a book. But one day when they read one of these characters out of the book, they find out that there are more characters in the world, and there's a lot of drama, and things are happening, and they have to try and save the world. So I love the idea of this book, but for me it was a 3-star read, and I thought it was creative. I loved the original character that they had, Millie, who is this like young girl detective from a Victorian style children's series. I loved her. I thought she was amazing. I thought she was really interesting. But unfortunately, this book I feel like has a lot of flaws. So one of the issues I had with this book was pacing. This book starts off with a real big action scene, and it's really gets your heart racing, and I thought that's what the rest of the book was going to be like, action scene after action scene, sort of perils and high stakes. But once that scene is over, we don't really get another one of those until very late on in the book. I was really disappointed. I thought, they started off really well, really fast paced at the beginning, and then from about 25% to about 75%, there's a real lull in the middle where it's incredibly slow, and I think if I hadn't been buddy reading it, I would have DNF'd at that point. So I do think the pacing is really off on this book, and there's a lot of filler, a lot of unnecessary bits in the middle that I just found really boring to read. I did find it interesting that we were from the brother's perspective, because it is a different perspective, and it's very interesting seeing how people from the outside would view things, but I do think it would have been more helpful to have some more of Charlie's perspective than we got, and we kind of miss some of the story by being in his brother's perspective. The other issue I had with this book is it is so classics heavy. So the author does say in her author's note / bio that she is a massive lover of the classics. She did a literature degree, so she is a huge classics fan. And somehow that means the only characters that have been read out of books over the years are classics characters. Now, I do understand there could have been copyright issues with bringing out some more recent characters that are covered by copyright, but to only ever bring out really traditional classics characters, and the only sort of close to modern one we got was probably Matilda from Roald Dahl, was quite disappointing. I understand that Charlie in the book has a real focus on classics. He is a literature professor focusing on Dickens, so it makes sense that he has brought out mostly classical characters, but for then all the other characters that we encounter in this book to be classic characters was really boring, especially as someone who doesn't really like classics and doesn't know who most of these characters are. The other issue I had was how almost every single character that is read out of a book apparently is cishet white male and from Western or pretty much British classics, considering this was set in New Zealand as well. So we did get Maui. It's mentioned a few times and appears briefly, but it's kind of implied that they're never really sure if Maui was a reading or if he truly is real and sort of part of the world. So, and that is the only character of colour that I can recall in the entirety of the book, both characters read out of books and real people, which is quite concerning. And there are only 3 female characters read out of the books. So we had Millie, who is the main character, we have the White Witch from Narnia, and Matilda from Roald Dahl, and the White Witch and Matilda take a real backseat role. They're not very pivotal players at all. They're kind of mentioned in action scenes, but that's about it. Millie is a co-main character, but she doesn't really have any development herself. In fact, she has no development. She just kind of is there as a prop, following along with Charlie and Rob's storyline. She's generally quite a bland character that I feel like could easily be swapped out for literally anyone else and it wouldn't make a difference. Rob's girlfriend gets the most disappointing storyline I've ever heard. There was literally no point in her being in this book at all. Even though she has dedicated chapters, they didn't actually end up contributing to the book at all. So it just was not great. I think there was a lot of things that could have been worked on in this book. I think, considering it was published only in the last couple of years, I'm kind of shocked by the lack of diversity in this book and how that was completely allowed, because even though Millie was a co-main character, all of the side characters that really had any influence on the story were pretty much all male, and it was just disappointing. So yeah, I did not like this book. I wouldn't recommend it, honestly, because I think the lack of diversity, especially in this book, was really disappointing for me. It's a great idea, and she said she was inspired by Inkheart, and I didn't like Inkheart as a child when I tried to read it, and I haven't tried to read it since, but honestly I do think Inkheart executed the idea a lot better than this book did. So those were all of my February reads. It was a bit of an up and down month, and my rereads really carried me through. I loved listening to those audiobooks, so that was a really fun time. I have read more this month so far based on averages, so I'm definitely on track to read more in March, which is good. But I think it was good that I gave myself the space that I needed in February to not push myself to read as much as I normally would, and I really enjoyed some of my books, and as I said, Wonderland is definitely a contender for one of the best books of the year. I think I did, in my knockout brackets on Instagram, I did pick Meat Market over Wonderland when they went head to head, but it was very, very close, and it will definitely be in my top 20, if not my top 10. So let me know how your February reading month went. What were your favourite reads in February? Did you read anything you'd recommend to me? If you like this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to see more content from me. And if you want to leave me a comment to let me know you are here, leave me a bunny emoji in the comments below. Thank you again for watching. Bye!